Part 1. The Battle of Gateway Bridge. In Chapter 1, Reuben is confronted by 3 squires who unexpectedly seem to want to be friendly. They offer him the chance to try on a knight's helmet and practice with wooden swords, but it turns into a trap. They beat him senseless while he is encased in the heavy padding and helmet. Afterward, Squire Prefect Ellison mocks Reuben, calling him a bastard and belittling him for his low status. Reuben snaps, attacking Ellison, but when Ellison draws his sword, Reuben fights back with a wooden practice sword. Reuben manages to escape, but not before Ellison delivers a dangerous blow. In Chapter 2, Reuben spends the day hiding in the stables, recovering from his beating. He reflects on the upcoming autumn gala and watches the preparations with longing. He's drawn to the princess, whom he admires from afar, imagining a life where they interact. His daydreams are interrupted when Ian, the groom, scolds him and asks him to saddle a horse for the princess. She demands Reuben's help despite Ian's objections, and Reuben, nervous, saddles Tamarisk, the prized horse. The princess insists on riding alone, but reluctantly accepts Reuben's company after Ian's insistence, marking an unexpected moment of interaction. In Chapter 3, Reuben, inexperienced with horses, rides out of Medford with Princess Arista. They pass through the city, and Reuben reflects on his future as a soldier in the King's Guard, but the ride with Arista feels like a fleeting dream of adventure. As they reach the Gateway Bridge, a group of riders ambushes them. Reuben tries to defend Arista with his sword, but he is outmatched. The attackers, playful and mocking, reveal their familiarity with the princess. Arista defends Reuben, but the encounter ends in humiliation for him. Reuben, embarrassed and defeated, returns home. In Chapter 4, Reuben returns to the barracks after a long, tiring day, reflecting on his emotions and the eerie atmosphere of the night. He finds his father, Richard, who shows unusual interest by asking about Reuben's day and the sword he was given. Their conversation reveals Richard's cynicism toward nobles, warning Reuben about the dangers of becoming involved with them. Reuben is also cautioned about the tower, which has been dark since the deaths of Lady Clare and the Chancellor, a sign of impending tragedy. Despite the tension, Richard promises Reuben a future as a castle guard. Part 2. Albert Winslow. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce encounter a frantic woman claiming a violent, naked man is in her barn. She offers them a meal if they remove him, and Hadrian decides to help. They find the man, Albert, who insists he's a nobleman, though destitute and living in the barn. After questioning, they realize the woman's story is a lie. The farm has been abandoned for years. The woman has stolen their horses and belongings, leaving Hadrian frustrated and learning a lesson in trusting people. Albert, once a noble, now survives on scraps, and Hadrian tries to understand his situation. In Chapter 2, Royce starts a fire while waiting for Hadrian and Albert. The group discusses their destination, Medford, where Hadrian and Royce hope to visit friends. Albert, a nobleman, shares gossip about Medford's royalty and the political intrigues of the court. Royce and Hadrian's plans shift when they discover their horses have been returned, freshly shod. Royce reveals he has an arrangement with the Thieves' Guild ensuring their safety. He decides to move on, suggesting they ride to Medford. Despite his reservations, Hadrian helps Albert, and Royce reflects on the idea that even selfish acts can lead to positive outcomes. Part 3. The Council of Amrath. In Chapter 1, King Amrath Essendon struggles with the discomfort of sitting through a meeting with his council. Tensions rise as Chancellor Braga discusses trade wars and the influence of the church, which Amrath is weary of. Simon Exeter, Amrath's cousin, challenges the king's leadership, especially criticizing Braga's past ties to the Nifron church and his ambitions. Simon accuses Braga of potentially plotting against the throne. Amrath deflects the accusations, asserting his authority. The meeting ends with Amrath dismissing most of the council, leaving only Braga and his trusted friend Leo Pickering behind. In Chapter 2, King Amrath, Leo, and Chancellor Braga discuss the politics surrounding the position of Chancellor. Amrath reveals his reluctance to appoint Leo due to concerns over favoritism and the nobles' reactions. He explains that Simon Exeter's lineage makes him a viable candidate, but his aggressive politics and personality make him problematic. Amrath expresses his trust in Braga, despite his outsider status, believing he is the best choice to serve as a neutral, unbiased chancellor. They also discuss Braga's past ambitions, including his failed attempt to become a sentinel in the Nifron Church and his current role in Malengar. Part 4. The Ghost of the High Tower. In Chapter 1, Reuben, soon to be sworn in as a castle guard, reflects on his life and feels unworthy of the promotion. He is interrupted while chopping wood by Ellison and the Three Cruelties, who plan to bully him before his new duties begin. A confrontation ensues, and Reuben uses an axe to defend himself, but is outnumbered. Just as the squires prepare to escalate the situation, Marvin and Fannin Pickering intervene, revealing that Reuben is a hero who saved the princess. The prince arrives, intervenes, and saves Reuben from further trouble, while the Pickerings defend him. In Chapter 2, Reuben joins Prince Alric and his brothers, Marvin and Fannin, for a frog hunting trip in Edgar's Swamp. They travel north from the city, where Reuben bonds with them over humor and conversation. Alric jokingly calls Reuben a guard, and the group laughs, despite some awkwardness over Reuben's association with nobility. As they hunt frogs in the misty swamp, they discuss sword fighting and family dynamics. Alric and Marvin tease Reuben, suggesting he learns sword fighting from Marvin. The chapter ends with a spooky tale about a haunted tower and the ghost of a chambermaid who took her life. In Chapter 3, after a long frog hunting excursion, Reuben returns to the castle late, feeling uneasy about facing his father. As a storm approaches, he notices a light in the high tower, a sign that someone may be about to die. The prince's story about a woman named Rose resurfaces in his mind, leading him to wonder if the light is connected to his own mother's death. Reuben then witnesses a woman climbing down the tower, seemingly escaping something. She explains she heard something she shouldn't and fears for her life, asking Reuben for help. In Chapter 4, Reuben hides the girl in the woodshed as the castle erupts into chaos after the alarm is sounded. She reveals she was hired to work at a surprise party in the tower, only to overhear two men plotting to kill the royal family. Fearing for her life, she fled through the window and slipped, leading to her injury. Reuben is skeptical but sympathetic, suspecting an assassination attempt. The girl, named Rose, insists on her innocence and fears being blamed for the plot. Reuben vows to keep her safe, planning to seek help from his father, a member of the Royal Guard. Part 5. After the Party. In Chapter 1, Sergeant Richard Hilford is investigating the disappearance of a woman, Rose, who had been secretly brought to the castle for a party. When her absence triggers an alarm, the search intensifies. Lord Exeter, the High Constable, arrives and presses Sergeant Barnes for answers. Barnes explains that Rose, a local woman, was part of a surprise gift for Captain Lawrence but disappeared without a trace. Exeter's investigation leads him to suspect Barnes's complicity, suggesting Rose's disappearance might involve more than just a mistake. In a tense moment, Barnes is forced to climb out of a window to demonstrate how it could be done, but he falls to his death, leaving Exeter to question the deeper motivations behind the events. Part 6. The House and the Tavern. In Chapter 1, Royce, Hadrian, and Albert arrive in Medford, passing through the town's various districts. Royce is on edge, reminded of his previous escape from the city. They make their way to the lower quarter to find Gwen, a woman who once saved their lives. The area is grim, with dilapidated buildings and poverty. Reaching the Medford house, Royce is met by a new girl, Jasmine, who informs him that Gwen refuses to see him. Despite his attempts to explain, Gwen's rejection is clear, leaving Royce and his companions to confront the unexpected outcome of their visit. In Chapter 3, Royce, Hadrian, and Albert leave the tavern and head down Wayward Street, where Royce unexpectedly becomes violent, breaking through a fence and attacking a man who had been following them. The man reveals he was sent by the Crimson Hand, a thieves' guild, to track anyone visiting the brothel and report their movements. When asked about Rose, a missing girl from the house, the man admits he doesn't know much. Royce, threatening to kill him, demands the man take them to the Crimson Hand's guild, hinting at the next step in their search for Rose. Part 7. The Lady of Flowers. In Chapter 1, Gwen reflects on her past and the events that led her to this moment. She struggles with painful memories of abuse and loss, especially the death of her friend Avon. As the Madam of Medford House, Gwen had hoped for a new life but feared her past would never let her go. She had helped Royce and Hadrian after they were wounded, and despite their growing connection, Royce remains distant. After 2 months of caring for him, Royce and Hadrian prepare to leave, leaving Gwen heartbroken. She watches them depart, questioning why her life feels so shattered again. In Chapter 2, Gwen overhears William the Carpenter and May discussing the search for Rose, who has gone missing. Gwen, still recovering from her injuries, struggles with guilt for letting Rose leave. Jolin reassures her, suggesting Rose is likely having fun, though Gwen feels something more serious is at play. Gwen reveals her concern, believing Rose is in trouble, but Jolin remains optimistic. The conversation shifts to Dixon, who is recovering from his injuries. As Gwen lies back down, she remains deeply worried about Rose's fate and the danger they may all be in. Part 8. The New Sword. In Chapter 1, Reuben is fitted with chainmail and a sword by the castle's smith, Bastian, who gives him a blade forged from Delgos steel, saying it was a gift from Prince Alric. Reuben heads to the castle, where he has a brief, awkward encounter with Princess Arista Essendon. Afterward, he secretly visits Rose, a prisoner he's been hiding, and brings her food while assuring her safety. Reuben reflects on his own worth and his feelings for Arista. Later, he encounters Prince Alric and the Pickerings, who test his swordsmanship. Despite initial awkwardness, Reuben learns some techniques before heading to the barracks. In Chapter 2, Reuben returns home to find his father, Richard Hilfred, angry and drunk. After a violent outburst, his father criticizes him for being soft and trusting others, especially for thinking too much. Reuben tries to warn him that someone is plotting to kill the king, sharing a conversation he overheard between two men, which a girl named Rose had hidden in the castle's high tower. Richard orders Reuben to keep Rose locked in the dungeon for now as he processes the information. Reuben feels the weight of his father's coldness and the tension between them. Part 9. The Crimson Hand. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce escort the thief Puzzle through the merchant quarter, heading towards a graveyard where Puzzle's associates are waiting. They learn that Puzzle's group, the Crimson Hand, is searching for someone named Rose, linked to a dangerous situation involving the High Constable, Lord Simon Exeter, who recently hung 3 of the group's members. Royce and Hadrian's inquiry about Gwen's attack connects her to this mess, and Top Hat, the leader of the Crimson Hand, warns them about the danger they're in. The chapter ends with Royce deciding to visit Gwen, despite her refusal to see them. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian arrive at Medford House to find 2 men harassing the women inside. One man holds Jasmine against the doorframe while the other shoves Abby. Hadrian intervenes to defuse the situation, and the men are forced to return the stolen ton of wort used to make ale. Inside, they find more trouble as 2 men with a knife threaten the women. Hadrian swiftly disarms them. Royce is distracted by Gwen, who reveals her injuries and the abuse she endured from Lord Exeter's men searching for Rose. Royce vows to confront Exeter despite Gwen's plea for him to leave and stay safe. Part 10. The Dandy and the Troll. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce find Viscount Albert Winslow transformed into a well-dressed nobleman, having used credit to fund his new look. He plans to gain wealth by mingling with high society and exploiting secrets from wealthy nobles, including offering to blackmail them for gold. Meanwhile, Gru, a shady alehouse owner, confronts the duo about their interference in his business. He offers them work as enforcers, explaining how he orchestrated the attack on Rose to protect his business interests. Gru also hints at Lord Exeter's involvement in Rose's assault, offering details in exchange for cooperation. In Chapter 2, Hadrian, Royce, and Albert discuss Lord Exeter, a powerful and arrogant noble. Albert reveals that Exeter's recent frustration stems from losing a coveted position to a foreigner, Percy Braga, who replaced the late Chancellor Wainwright. Albert also mentions other political tensions, including the death of Lady Clare, Braga's wife. Royce is concerned with the disappearance of a prostitute who likely went to the castle and suspects Exeter's involvement. Royce decides they must target Exeter and sets Albert the tasks of finding a paying job and assisting with their plan to kill the Lord. Part 11. The New Guard. In Chapter 1, Reuben, now a member of the Castle Guard, struggles with the weight of his new responsibilities while reflecting on his relationship with Rose. He reassures her while she remains locked in a dungeon for her safety, and he tries to comfort her during her distress. Reuben is conflicted as he begins to feel more than friendship toward her, but his devotion to another woman, Arista, holds him back. After a tender moment where Rose confesses her affection, Reuben's loyalty to Arista becomes clear, leading to a mix of frustration and longing as he distances himself from Rose's advances. In Chapter 2, Reuben, a new castle guard, is thrust into the whirlwind of a grand celebration, feeling out of place amidst the festivities. He struggles with his feelings of inadequacy, particularly about his role and his interactions with Rose, a woman he admires. Assigned to guard duty, he faces an uneventful yet humbling task of managing the incoming carriages for the event. As the night progresses, Reuben's thoughts shift to Rose, realizing he likes her, but is unsure how to navigate his emotions. Meanwhile, he helps the prince and his companions slip away for a nighttime frog hunting adventure. Part 12. The Autumn Gala. In Chapter 1, King Amrath and Queen Anne prepare for a gala with their daughter Arista getting ready as well. Amrath, anticipating a night of revelry, reflects on his arranged marriage to Anne and his doubts about her love. He recalls his initial fears about their union, but over time, he has come to love her deeply. Anne, brushing Arista's hair, reassures him of her affection, though their conversation remains playful. They discuss their children and the upcoming party, where Amrath is eager to show off his family, and his son Alric seems particularly eager to attend. In Chapter 2, King Amrath and his wife Anne attend a harvest gala where the festivities are full of excess and pageantry. Amid the celebration, Amrath reflects on the success of the harvest and the appointment of a new chancellor, Percy Braga. However, tensions rise between two drunk nobles, Conrad and Heft, who bicker over an ancient family shield. The conflict nearly escalates into violence, but Amrath intervenes. The king observes his guests, including his son's absence and his daughter Arista's solitary behavior. A conversation with Bishop Salder hints at a looming threat to the royal family. In Chapter 3, Amrath is called into a chapel by Bishop Salder, who expresses concerns about Lord Exeter potentially plotting to seize the throne. The bishop believes Exeter may have been involved in the death of Chancellor Wainwright and the suspicious death of Castle Guard Barnes, suggesting that Exeter's actions point to treason. Despite the bishop's speculation, Amrath remains skeptical and dismissive, confident in Exeter's loyalty and his own ability to deal with conspiracies. As the conversation ends, Amrath is informed of a new, urgent matter involving the Earls of Westmarch and Longbow. Part 13. The Coachman, the Lady, and the Drunks. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian arrive at the Hallowed Sword Tavern, where Royce convinces the carriage driver, Dunwoody, to join them for drinks by offering a generous deal. Inside, they enjoy the lively atmosphere, toasting to various things, including the tavern's legendary sword. After a night of drinking, they escort the drunken driver to a room at an inn, where they use his clothes to disguise themselves. Upon leaving, they encounter a group of thieves from the Crimson Hand who mistake them for rival guild members. Royce and Hadrian manage to avoid conflict, leaving in Dunwoody's carriage. In Chapter 2, Albert Winslow attends an autumn gala at Essendon Castle, reflecting on his recent struggles and the sudden shift in his fortunes. He is back in the lively atmosphere after a period of despair, having narrowly escaped death. At the event, Albert's main tasks are to find a paying job and deliver a message to Lord Simon Exeter, though both are proving difficult. He engages in conversation with Lady Constance, who shares gossip about Lady Lillian's troubled marriage and stolen earrings. Albert proposes a solution involving a discreet transaction, setting the stage for a potential job. In Chapter 3, Hadrian and Royce wait by the carriages near the castle, observing a group of men leaving, including the king in disguise. The king insists that the guards lie about his departure to avoid further obligations. As the group leaves, Hadrian reflects on his restlessness, never being one to sit idle, and observes the quiet street, noting the various alehouses and sheriff patrols. While waiting for a task ahead, he worries about Royce's less honorable methods of dealing with Gwen's attacker, preferring a more straightforward approach. Royce, however, is in a poetic mood, complicating the situation further. Part 14. Traitors. In Chapter 1, Queen Anne argues with her daughter, Princess Arista, over her bedtime, revealing the Queen's harsh expectations for women in their society. Meanwhile, Richard Hilfred, stationed in the corridor, listens to their argument and reflects on the royal family's dynamics. Afterward, he navigates the palace, planning to check on various tasks, including locating the missing Rose. He overhears a tense exchange between Bishop Salder and Lord Exeter, with Salder defending his actions and denying any conspiracy. Richard then reveals to the bishop that he has found Rose, setting the stage for further developments. Part 15. Rose. In Chapter 1, Richard Hilfred and Bishop Salder visit the dungeon to question Rose, a young girl who overheard a conversation about killing the king. Rose reveals that the men mentioned "Your Grace" and discussed a person named Claire, who had uncovered the Chancellor's murderer before her death. However, Rose struggles to remember further details or identify the voices. After the questioning, Salder advises Richard to secretly move Rose out of the castle before Lord Exeter finds her. Salder stresses the importance of keeping her safe, and hints at a larger, urgent plan involving the kingdom's fate. In Chapter 2, Reuben is on duty at the gate, reflecting on his strained relationship with his father. Grisham, a veteran guard, questions him about a fight with Richard, revealing that Reuben's father disapproved of him associating with the prince. As they talk, Richard arrives with Rose, the girl who overheard a plot to kill the king. Richard plans to smuggle her out of the castle to protect her from Lord Exeter, a traitor. He orders Reuben to stay at his post, emphasizing that his mother's death shaped his tough parenting. Reuben watches Rose leave, unsure of his role in the situation. In Chapter 3, Rose is led by Reuben's father, Richard, through the city, feeling both fear and a strange sense of safety in his presence. Though initially mistrusting men, she finds herself drawn to Reuben, whom she believes is different and possibly saving himself for her. As they move through the cold, she reflects on her past and feelings for Reuben. Despite her circumstances as a fugitive, Rose decides to thank Richard but quickly realizes her attempts to win him over will require patience. She imagines a future with Reuben and his family, her love for him growing deeper. Part 16. The Lord High Constable. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce discuss their plans while observing Rose and her guard, Sergeant Richard Hilfred, moving through the city. Hadrian decides to follow them, concerned about the situation. Rose, escorted by Richard, is pursued by a patrol seeking her, suspecting her to be a fugitive. A confrontation ensues, with Richard killing one deputy and fighting the sheriff. Hadrian intervenes, saving Rose from another deputy, and the group continues their journey. They head to the lower quarter, where Hadrian is left to stall the approaching patrol while Richard and Rose escape into the shadows. In Chapter 2, Albert waits in a castle hall, reflecting on his life and his uneasy position with Royce. He is soon confronted by Lord Exeter, who demands to know why he is there. Albert delivers a cryptic message from an unnamed person, claiming to have Rose and offering a deal, which unsettles Exeter. The Lord, suspicious, orders Albert to be detained and sends his men to investigate the carriage outside. Albert is left under the watch of a soldier, Vince, who makes him uncomfortable with his presence. Exeter prepares to confront the mysterious figure at the carriage. In Chapter 3, Simon Exeter follows his men to the carriages and learns the mysterious figure who contacted him has fled in a different carriage. He orders his men to gather and split up as he heads alone to the graveyard in the merchant quarter. Meanwhile, he questions Viscount Albert Winslow, who confirms he met the mysterious man but knows little about him. Simon then boards a carriage to Paper Street, but the driver suddenly turns hostile, revealing himself to be involved in the conspiracy. He threatens Simon with a blade, signaling that his plans are falling apart. Part 17. The Feathered Hats. In Chapter 1, Hadrian confronts a group of deputies who mistakenly believe he's involved in the attack on Rose. After a brief skirmish, he defeats them, but Rose and the sergeant are still missing. Hadrian races to Medford House covered in blood, only to find Rose isn't there. The women at the house, including Gwen, are confused by his story. Hadrian heads back out to search the streets, eventually finding Rose's body in a dark alley. She has been murdered, her throat slit. His anger and frustration grow as he searches for the sergeant, but Rose is alone. In Chapter 2, Hadrian carries Rose's body to Medford House, where Gwen and the women mourn her death. Hadrian is shaken, trying to make sense of Rose's murder and the disappearance of the sergeant. While cleaning up, he reflects on the events leading to Rose's death and the conflicting details about the sheriff's orders. Gwen, desperate, asks Hadrian for a personal favor and reads his palm. Her reaction is one of shock and sorrow, but she doesn't explain further. Hadrian, concerned about Royce, decides to leave and search for his friend, realizing Royce might be in danger too. Part 18. Duster. In Chapter 1, Royce captures and tortures Lord Exeter, binding him to a statue in Gentry Square. Royce reveals he's avenging Gwen DeLancy, a woman Exeter assaulted. Despite Exeter's pleas, Royce shows no mercy, dismembering him to ensure he suffers. During the torture, Exeter attempts to bargain, revealing a conspiracy led by Bishop Salder aiming to overthrow the kingdom and murder the royal family. He insists his death would hasten this plot, but Royce remains unmoved, prioritizing his revenge over Exeter's warnings. Exeter's fate seems sealed, and Royce's ruthless determination reveals his commitment to avenging Gwen's suffering. Part 19. The Fire. In Chapter 1, Richard Hilford returns to the castle with a bloodstain on his sleeve, unsettling his son Reuben. Richard inquires about the king's whereabouts, noting he cannot locate the royal guards assigned to him. Reuben and Grisham report that the king briefly left with 2 drunk lords but then returned to the castle. Richard also mentions that the queen and princess retired early, hinting at tension within the royal family. Reuben's curiosity is piqued by his father's grim mood and the unexplained blood, hinting at hidden dangers unfolding within the castle walls that could affect the royal court. In Chapter 2, Reuben oversees departing guests at the castle's front gate when he hears screams from inside. Learning that a fire has trapped the royal family, he tries to help, but is confronted by his father, Richard, who orders him back to his post. When Reuben persists, he discovers Richard has chained the doors to the royal residence, intentionally trapping the king, queen, and princess. Richard reveals his resentment toward the king, blaming him for his wife's death and admitting to orchestrating the fire as part of a plot against the monarchy. Reuben defies him, drawing his sword. In Chapter 3, Hadrian arrives at the castle, engulfed in flames with a crowd gathered to watch. Observing the inferno, he wonders if Royce orchestrated the fire to trap Lord Exeter. Without knowing Royce's exact plan, Hadrian reflects on Royce's ruthless philosophy of eliminating threats completely. He notes the rose-marked coach and the line of carriages are gone, leaving him uncertain of Exeter's fate, or whether Albert escaped. Standing amidst the crowd, he feels a mix of exhaustion and detachment, contemplating the grim reality of those trapped inside as the castle burns. In Chapter 4, Reuben confronts his father, Richard, realizing he has locked the royal family inside the burning castle. After a brief struggle, Richard is killed, and Chancellor Braga reveals the plot to assassinate the royal family. Refusing to abandon the royals, Reuben breaks into the burning castle, rescuing Princess Arista. Although others declare the situation hopeless, Reuben's determination leads him to try to save Queen Anne as well, but the fire forces him to retreat. Near the edge of collapse, Reuben receives mysterious guidance, helping him barely escape, leaving him haunted by the tragedy unfolding around him. In Chapter 5, Hadrian watches Essendon Castle engulfed in flames, the city's people gathered in horror. Amid the chaos, Hadrian recalls his violent past and his struggles with guilt and regret. He learns that the royal family has been killed, save for Princess Arista. As civil war looms, Hadrian sees a crowd around a mutilated body bearing a message from Royce, marking revenge against those harming women from Medford House. Hadrian eventually heads for rest, reflecting on Royce's deadly retribution throughout the city. Royce's actions leave a trail of brutal warnings, signaling an escalating conflict with powerful enemies. Part 20. Fallout. In Chapter 1, Gwen, still recovering from a recent assault, is at Medford House when soldiers arrive, arresting her and her companions for the murder of Lord Exeter, the High Constable. Although she and her girls are helpless to resist, the Sheriff Ethan shows sympathy while helping her into the wagon. Despite her injuries, Gwen attempts to calm her frightened friends, yet she too fears execution. As they are locked in, she clings to a faint hope from Hadrian's fortune, the word Riyria, a whispered reminder of possible rescue and survival. In Chapter 2, Royce regrets his miscalculation, realizing his actions have endangered Gwen and the women of Medford House. He struggles to devise a plan to save them, recalling the strategic manipulation skills of his former partner, Merrick. Hadrian joins him, and they discuss potential allies and enemies, identifying Bishop Salder as a key figure connected to the conspiracy. Royce decides that direct force won't work and instead resolves to use persuasion. Concluding that they need leverage, he plans to enlist Albert's help in confronting Salder, recognizing that the solution requires strategic manipulation rather than brute force. Part 21. The Day After. In Chapter 1, Chancellor Percy Braga assesses the aftermath of a fire that devastated Essendon Castle, leaving it in ruins. Amid the chaos, council members gather to discuss the kingdom's future. Though Braga prepares for a potential regency, news arrives that King Amrath and the prince survived, having been out hunting during the fire. This revelation halts succession plans and briefly lifts the spirits of the council. However, Braga faces a grim duty as the king returns, unaware that Queen Anne and Princess Arista likely perished in the blaze. In Chapter 2, Albert stays with his friend Lord Darif in Medford and learns disturbing news. The fire at the castle was an assassination attempt on the royal family orchestrated by Lord High Constable Simon Exeter, who was later found murdered. Fearing suspicion for his role in delivering a message to Exeter, Albert contemplates fleeing the city but ultimately decides to stay and confront his fate. He meets Royce and Hadrian at a tavern, where Royce tasks him with delivering a mysterious package to Bishop Salder, warning him to act quickly. Albert's dread deepens as he prepares to comply. In Chapter 3, Bishop Salder returns to Mayor's Cathedral after the castle fire, reflecting on the church's role in history and his failure to prevent Exeter's death. A nobleman delivers a purse, containing a severed finger and Exeter's ring, accompanied by a threatening note from someone named Rose. The note demands the release and protection of the women at Medford House, hinting at their involvement in Exeter's death. Salder realizes the danger of Rose's knowledge and decides he must convince the king to release the women to protect himself from further exposure. In Chapter 4, Albert returns to the Hideous Head and reports to Royce and Hadrian about delivering a package to Bishop Salder. He expresses concerns about his safety, fearing the royal guard might be after him. Royce refuses to let him leave, instead assigning him to gather information on the whereabouts and fate of Gwen and the girls who were arrested. Meanwhile, King Amrath, devastated by the death of his wife Anne, refuses to leave their bedroom. His grief overwhelms him, and he rejects anyone who tries to intervene, including his children Leo, Alric, and Arista. Part 22, Homecomings. In Chapter 1, King Amrath surveys the aftermath of a devastating fire that claimed his wife and daughter and struggles with guilt and loss. His council, including Leo and Braga, reveal that the fire was set by Richard Hilfred, acting on orders from Lord Exeter, who was later killed. The Queen's death is attributed to the locked doors, and Braga explains the prince, Reuben Hilfred, saved Princess Arista, though his motivations are unclear. Amid accusations, Amrath's rage almost leads to violence. Meanwhile, Royce and Hadrian celebrate a successful plan to clear the women of Medford House, setting the stage for their next job. Part 23, Hilfred. In Chapter 1, Reuben wakes up in a strange place, disoriented and in intense pain after a fire. He realizes he's alive, but wishes he weren't due to the agony. A nurse, Dorothy, tends to his burns and reassures him that the pain means he's healing. Reuben asks about the princess and learns she is fine, though his own survival is a mystery. He recalls carrying the princess out of a burning castle, but failing to save the queen. Dorothy suggests that Reuben's actions were noble, but rumors spread that he and his father set the fire. In Chapter 2, Reuben wakes to pain and finds the bishop visiting him. The bishop questions Reuben about the fire, specifically about his father's involvement. Reuben confirms he fought his father to save the princess, but doesn't know who else might have been involved in the fire. The bishop reveals that the king, mourning his wife's death, is blaming Reuben and his family. The king believes Reuben's father acted with a co-conspirator and wants revenge. The bishop offers help but warns that Reuben's name will be tied to the tragedy, making it hard for him to escape blame. In Chapter 3, Reuben battles pain and nightmares as he recovers. When the king arrives, accompanied by Princess Arista and others, Reuben fears execution, but is instead questioned about his actions during the fire. The king learns Reuben saved the princess and fought his father, who had planned to kill the royal family. The king expresses his gratitude, explaining that Reuben is no traitor. Instead of punishment, Reuben is appointed royal sergeant-at-arms and tasked with protecting the princess. The king also hints at a mysterious voice that guided Reuben in the fire, possibly his mother. Part 24, The Rose and the Thorn. In Chapter 1, Hadrian watches the snow fall on Rose's grave, reflecting on her death and blaming himself for her fate. He observes Gwen, devastated by the loss, and Royce, who awkwardly comforts her. As mourners leave, Hadrian notices members of the Crimson Hand watching them from the graveyard. Top Hat approaches, offering condolences and revealing rumors about the mysterious deaths of powerful figures, including Lord Exeter. He warns Royce and Hadrian not to cause trouble in Medford, suggesting a mutual understanding between them. The chapter ends with Top Hat acknowledging Royce's involvement in Exeter's death, but walking away without further confrontation. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian prepare for a journey to Baron McManus's estate, packing for winter storms. Hadrian helps Gwen and the girls clean Gru's tavern, which Gwen has bought. She talks about her plans to renovate the place, naming it the Rose. She offers Royce and Hadrian a room, which Royce insists they should pay for despite Gwen's reluctance. They discuss the risk of working out of her tavern. Later, Albert, now recovering, suggests they need a name for their work, and Hadrian proposes Riyria. The chapter ends with Gwen approving of the name. Part 25. The Visitor. In Chapter 1, Bishop Salder discusses the aftermath of the failed assassination attempt on the king, expressing frustration with the lack of progress. He reflects on the church's slow, methodical approach to power, and how change requires patience. Salder dismisses concerns about Exeter's killer and the girl, Rose, as insignificant, believing they will be forgotten. When the conversation turns to Richard Hilfred's death, Salder reassures his companion that Hilfred's betrayal won't cause trouble. They plan their next move, agreeing that if the king is to be killed, it must be done carefully and without leaving evidence, perhaps framing a nameless thief.